This is One Sentence News, a daily podcast featuring 3 news stories with a sentence-long summary and 1 sentence of context apiece. I'm Colin Wright. This is a sponsored message. I've been using Anchor as my podcast host for a while now, and it's been a pleasure to use. Anchor offers benefits that most other hosts do not. It's free to use, but it also has a collection of tools that allow you to create a podcast completely within the Anchor website or smartphone app. They distribute your show to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other distribution channels without any additional effort on your part, and you can make money from your podcast without any minimum audience size. So you can use it as a more traditional podcast host like I do, but it's also got everything you need to start a podcast from scratch. If you're keen to give it a shot, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. It's Thursday, July 21st, 2022. Let's talk about the news. From The Guardian, Biden unveils extreme heat plan, but doesn't declare climate emergency. U.S. President Biden has announced a new batch of initiatives aimed at ameliorating the impacts of climate change throughout the country, but stopped short of announcing a full-blown climate state of emergency, as some rumors suggested he would. Following yet another failure to get climate-related legislation passed in the heavily partisan Congress, Biden said he would take executive action to get some things moving, and this is ostensibly the first of such several actions. This one includes $2.3 billion in funding to help communities cope with heat waves, droughts, and floods, guidance that will allow the federal government to provide cooling infrastructure across the country, and new offshore wind energy leases in the Gulf of Mexico. The White House press secretary said that although Biden didn't announce a state of emergency this time around, which would give the White House more options, it's still a possibility in the near future. From Reuters, Bolsonaro attacks Brazil's election system in briefing for diplomats. Brazilian President Bolsonaro has held a briefing in which he claimed, without offering any evidence, that the country's election system is vulnerable to fraud, and said that the military should be brought into cities to secure the country's upcoming election. This claim is being seen as one of many preparatory moves leading up to Brazil's October 2nd presidential election, which Bolsonaro's opponent, the former president Lula, is currently favored to win by a decent margin. The idea is that by sowing seeds of doubt about the election system ahead of time, as former U.S. President Trump did in 2020, and other autocratic-leaning leaders have done around the world previously, and by getting loyal military officers and units into position, it's easier to claim fraud when the president's opponent wins, and then hold on to power rather than stepping aside, using the military to put down anyone who challenges that narrative, and possibly jailing the opposition leader, calling them a cheater as well. And from Deutsche Welle, EU urges countries to reduce gas demand by 15% amid threat of Russian cuts. The European Commission has published an emergency proposal for EU member nations to cut their gas-based energy usage by 15% before next April, as Russia seems increasingly likely to fully cut gas flow into the region in the near future. There's a lot to this story, but in essence, the EU has been highly reliant on Russian energy products, especially natural gas, for a long while, and consequently, their infrastructure needs that regular inflow to function properly. Russia has been signaling, however, that it will possibly, maybe even probably, stop sending gas to EU countries sometime soon, because they're not pulling back on sanctions against Russia, and they're sending financial and military support to Ukraine, which Russia doesn't like. There's a chance Russia will continue providing gas at low levels to the EU, as it is now, but the basis for this proposal is that the Union shouldn't lean on that maybe, and should start acting as if the gas is already gone, initially with voluntary usage cuts, but with an available amendment that would allow Brussels to implement a mandatory cut if it's ever warranted, as well. If you're finding some value in One Sentence News, consider leaving a quick review wherever you get your podcasts, and/or sharing the show with a friend. You can find out more about this show or subscribe to the email version at onesentencenews.com, and you can support this and other related projects, like the Let's Know Things and Brain Lenses podcasts, at understandery.com.